how should people date?
How should people date is a very, very big question. First thing that I would ask is, who are these people? Because the answer to me is different if you're talking about a 15-year-old versus a 25-year-old. And so that would be my first question. I don't think you get the same answer unless you know the context of that person's life. So what are you more interested in? The teenage dating, the somebody who's old enough to get married dating? What are we talking about here?
I think a lot of my audience that listens to this show are seniors in high school and 20-year-olds to college students. So for people who want to know, hey, I want to start dating, but I'm not sure how to date, or
Gotcha.
I've been dating and it hasn't been working, what can I do to figure this out?
Yeah, that's again, it's a big question, and anytime if I was talking to you specifically or to any specific person, I would want to ask them a bunch of questions before I even began to try to answer the question for them specifically. I think that there are some trends with our society these days, and whether we're talking about Christians or not, that are interesting that I would probably run into a bunch. One of which would be young folks are becoming more and more risk averse these days. I think it has to do with a lot of factors, technology being the main one. And so most of the time, like if you go back to the 90s, this is when I first started thinking about these issues. In the 90s, a lot of the attention and focus was on the fact that, especially in Christian culture, was on the fact that young folks needed to be told, calm down. Like, uh, you are young, you're stupid, your hormones are going crazy. Let's all just relax here. And of course, that the emphasis on recognizing that particular problem, of course, then led to some other problems. But that was something that needed to be said at the time. Whereas I think the trends these days are more along the lines of, hey, young people, put down your phone and go out and actually talk to people and interact and take some risks relationally. And so that's more of what I see these days. So it's just interesting. It's a shift that's happened, and what I would say to folks these days would probably be, as a whole, a little bit different than back then. Does that ring true for you or no?
So to make sure that I understand what you're saying, before the 90s, kids were very prominently dating each other. It was a big thing. And then after the 90s, it became so big that it was just like, hey, okay, calm down. You're doing too many things too quickly. You're not slowing down to think about what it is, why it is you're dating. You're just dating to date. And then now today, everyone is very, they're not trying to date because they don't want to deal with all of the problems, the difficulties that come up when you're in relationships and when you're doing things. Is that a good?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's it's those are the trends, and I would add to it that um, the trend towards dating didn't exist the way that we know it today until the invention of the car. So
Mm-hmm.
like the invention of the car back in the early 1900s sort of allowed for a dating that had never in society been seen before that. And so that shift then moves forward, moves forward, moves forward. By the time you get to the 80s and 90s, yes, not only do you have everyone dating each other, but you just have sort of a culture of uh, promiscuity, even amongst uh, Christians, as a trend. Anyways, this is, of course, we're not talking about everybody, um, but that's the direction it was going. And at some point, Christians, 70s, 80s, 90s started to sort of push back against, and you get the free love culture of the 60s, and like there's these trends in society that are going a particular direction, and so then you have Christians pushing back against that and saying, wait a second, everybody, the Bible does have stuff to say about how we should do this. And it's not that you should do whatever you want. It's not that you should be looking towards relationships as a way to, in your teens, learn how to uh, have sex so that by the time you get married, you know what you're doing. Like, let's calm down. This is not the biblical approach to the way that relationships should work. So there was a pushback against that. So I would say from the early 1900s through the 90s, it was all going one direction, and then Christians were sort of pushing back against that. And then something happened, and kids started dating less. They started having sex less, out of wedlock births. There are all these statistics that show that at some point in the 2000s, as a society, things started kind of going the other direction. It wasn't because the Christians won the argument, were like, hey, we should all abstain from having sex until marriage because God designed marriage for blah, 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 blah. Like, that's, America as a whole did not buy into that argument and then say, okay, we should, dating should look wildly different now. That's not what happened. What happened was that young people in America have become way less of risk takers. They stay at home more. They're on their screens more. They are, they're watching pornography more rather than going having sex with real people. Like, all these societal trends have now affected the way that young people approach dating, to where it's just a different thing now than it was back when I was growing up. That makes sense.
So I wanted to, I guess, cover two topics. The first was, what does, because you mentioned that there was, young people had been dating a certain way, and then the church pushed back on that, but the pushback was a little too much. And so now, with that plus the introduction of social media and technology, their kids are more isolated. They're not going out as much, not dating as much. What does a biblical dating framework look like?
That's a great question. And if we're talking about, you said primarily we want to talk about the, seniors in high school, older, and to the college range. Why someone is dating, it should inform how they date. So if you are dating because you want to learn how to interact with women, and that's why you're dating. Or if you're a woman, you're dating to learn how to interact with boys in a one-to-one, like, exclusive context rather than just at school or whatever. If that's your motive for dating, it's gonna the way that you approach relationships is going to look one way. If you are dating because you want to try to figure out who you're going to marry, then dating is going to look different. And so the first and most important question to ask yourself if you're going into a dating relationship is, why am I doing this? Why am I, not to take the specific person out of it, why am I doing this at all? Is it because I need to learn things and I need to become better as a human at doing a certain thing before I'm ready to get married, and so I need to start dating? Or is it because you are specifically looking for a spouse? And how you answer that question then will determine the way the dating relationship will look. I do think so. That's number one. You got to determine that first and then move forward from there. I don't think that I don't think it's unbiblical to begin to date as an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old without, I don't think you have to say to yourself, I've got to figure out if this person is the one that I'm going to marry, as the primary goal for dating that person. I think that sets, at that young an age, too high an expectation on the relationship. It's going to put too much pressure on it. And most likely you're not ready to get married at that point yet. I also think you shouldn't approach a dating relationship as practice. I think that's selfish to the other person. I think it's self-centered, and you don't want to do that. And so if I am giving advice to an 18, 19, 20-year-old about, okay, how do I approach this relationship? I would tell them, if you go into the relationship for figuring out something about yourself, you're doing it incorrectly. That's just textbook selfishness and self-centeredness. If you are going into the relationship as an 18, 19, 20-year old who knows you can't get married for 5 years, going into that relationship with the aim of figuring out if that specific person is supposed to be your spouse is also extremely selfish, because it places an expectation on the person that you're dating that they can't bear. And so if you're going to date at 18, 19, 20 and you're not ready to be married, do not go into it thinking this is about me learning something. And do not go into it thinking this is about getting married to this person. Neither one of those is good. If you can come up with a third reason, let's talk.
What? So if you don't want to date someone with the expectation of marrying them, and you also don't want to date someone with the expectation to do nothing, what should people be dating for?
Can you think of anything? As you're, I know that I'm putting you on the spot or whatever. This is just a conversation, but could you think of a reason that is not one of those two things? It's not about either you learning something about you. Let me go into this dating relationship so I can learn something that makes me better and more suitable to be a husband eventually. That's not a reason. And also, let me go into this dating relationship with the goal of specifically making sure you either I'm going to marry you or not, and that's the point of why we're dating. What would be another reason to date?
To find out if the person is the sort of individual that you would want to spend the rest of your life with.
And how would that not be the same thing as learning something about yourself?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I'm not either. I don't have a silver bullet answer. I've heard folks come up with all sorts of reasons, and they're like, well, um, I'm actually going, I need to date because it's not selfish. It's actually, uh, I am preparing myself to be a good husband in the future. So the actual motive is not selfishness for me. It's for my future spouse. It is, I'm going into this dating relationship, not putting the expectation that this person has to be the one that I determine whether I'm marrying or not. Maybe we're just going to go on some dates and we're going to hang out. But this this ability that I will develop to treat this person kindly, to put their needs above my own, blah 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 blah, is going to help me become the type of person that actually is going to be better for the person that I marry. And so it's not selfish. It's actually it's thinking forward to what kind of person I need for my future spouse's benefit to become better at this, to become a better person, to become better at listening, to become better at putting somebody else's needs above my own. If I just jump straight into marriage without ever having to practice any of this on another human other than my, siblings or parents or whatever, if but intentionally with one other person learning how to do uh, the types of things that are going to be required, that to lay down aspects of my preferences for this other person. I got to practice that. And it's tough to practice laying down your own preferences for your annoying brother. It's a little easier to learn how to practice laying down your preferences for somebody who's pretty, who you like and want to like you. And so that would be one as an example of like, you can, if you're intentional about what you're doing and how you're thinking about it, you can come up with a reason why dating without having um, marriage as the end goal of that particular relationship necessarily. Maybe it does turn into that. You're open to that. If you guys, you're not cutting off that possibility, but you're also not putting the pressure on that particular relationship of this is a failure if we don't get married. It's no, we are both, we like each other. We want to explore this further, but we also know that part of what we're doing here is learning how to be a better spouse for somebody else, possibly.
So you want to keep the person you date. So you want to date in such a way that it is focused on finding, you want to keep it so that you are trying to develop yourself into the sort of person that they would want to be with. Is
Yes, I would say it as if you're approaching the relationship with the other person as um, if you're relating to the other person as a hey, you're practice for later for somebody
mm,
else. That is selfish. That's wrong. If you are approaching the relationship as um, but we both are young and need to learn things. We think maybe there's something here. Um, but what I'm doing is actually learning to put you ahead of myself. And that is going to help me later with somebody else possibly or with you possibly. But if it's a matter of again, why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it? Are you just using somebody to make yourself better? Or are you entering into a relationship, keyword big relationship, where it's a back and forth of the two of you um, learning from each other, knowing it could be you, it could be somebody else. That's also then going to inform how you go about the dating process. Like um, it's very, very difficult when you're thinking in terms of what is better for this person than me, for it to turn into then you using that person, whether it's sexually or in any other way. So that it provides protection for the relationship if you approach it from the standpoint of this is not just about me. This is
mm,
this is both of us, and we're both learning. And it may be for me, it may be for somebody else, but there is value in the two of us learning how to relate in a way that is either going to benefit us if we end up getting married, or it could end up benefiting somebody else. It's very difficult to do for young
mm,
people. It is. This is not like, and this is why I don't think 15-year-olds should do it. Like
mm,
they're not capable of that level of maturity of an approach to a relationship. I don't 15, 16, 17. I would just tell them, you can't do this yet. You're not mature enough. But once you get to the point where you are mature enough to approach a relationship that way, that should be what the dating relationship is about, until you get to the point, maybe, where you are ready to get married.
mm. So it should be seen as a team effort. So you're not relying on the person to fulfill your needs. They are not relying on you. You are trying to find out, is what type of person do I like, and what type of person do they like.
And am I capable of changing things about myself if necessary?
Hmm.
Because that's you're gonna know almost immediately who you like, who you are attracted to, who you get along with. That's not difficult at all. Um, that's the easiest thing in the world. The difficult part is, am I capable of approaching a relationship in such a way as I can just lay down parts of myself for the other person?
Hmm.
And what you should be looking for is a partner who can do the same.
Hmm.
And so learning that, learning how to identify that in yourself and others is to me the should be the main goal of dating.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of a book. Have you read the book Models by Mark Manson?
I've not.
Is very very good book. Models and Mate. I read the two of them. They're not Christian books, so they're
Okay.
a lot of the advice in it is with the end goal of like having sex with women, but also he in the book he basically explains you have to decide what type of relationship do you want to have. Is it long? Is it short? Are you just looking for a hookup? Be completely honest about your intention going in. But then he said when you go to talk to women, a lot of times you are trying to find someone who you meld well with. One of the examples he gave was humor. Some women have very sarcastic humor, and some guys are very very sarcastic. But guys who cannot be sarcastic, the humor just doesn't. It won't go through. The women won't get it. It doesn't work. Some guys, like, I know I have a very kind of quirky, weird sense of humor, and not every woman gets it. I had an experience actually recently. I sent someone I knew a thing I thought was funny, and they just didn't get it, and I was like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah,
And so some of finding a mate is, yeah, like you have to send someone things you're interested in, or you send, you try your humor around them, and if they don't like it, then yeah, there's just probably not the type of person who you would need to be with because they don't get, they're not going to understand you, right? Um, so going on that note, we're in the modern age. A lot of the connection that young people have is on social media. It does cause us to be more isolated, but in a lot of ways, I think it also makes us more connected because you can reach so many more people so quickly.
sure.
And with that on the line, we have dating apps that are introduced. What are your thoughts on dating apps? Should we use them? Should we not use them? What are your thoughts?
My my instinct is that they're horrible and don't use them.
Okay.
That's my instinctual response. I think it's better if you are able to build a community around yourself to where relationships can happen naturally within community. I think that's ideal. I also know that that doesn't happen all the time, and that it can be very difficult to make that happen. So I think there's the ideal, which is uh, be in a community, find community where it's uh, not just you picking, swiping, whatever, some random person, and then you know you don't know anything about them until you start dating them. Like that to me, well, you see their profile and what their interests are or whatever. Like that's it's just not enough. And I think it's a solution to a problem, which is that people don't have community these days.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we solve the real problem, which is that, then the dating apps become unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you don't have that and it's the only solution, I can see why people it's sometimes necessary. If you go like if you can consistently go to a church and if there's only 50 people there and only one person your age and you're not going to date them, then what what's the solution? Okay, what about school? It's very difficult to on a college campus just strike up a friendship with somebody out of nowhere. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but in my opinion, it would be better to join um, either a campus ministry or even some club and just get involved in a real people community situation and then go from there than it is to click on somebody's profile on an app because you skip so many steps of so many of the problems of the app way of dating. The thing it provides for is opportunity, and a lot of that's what folks want a lot of the times. It takes more work to build opportunity through community, and so it's more difficult, but it is vastly superior. So I recommend folks do it that way if they can, and use the apps as a last resort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was another thing that the books I mentioned earlier talked about was if you're trying to meet women, you want to do so by finding things you're interested in and then joining groups and clubs that are doing those things, right? If you're really into animals, volunteer at an animal hospital and go take care of them. If you're super into archery, go to like a lot of archery clubs, martial arts, go to martial arts clubs. If you're into like languages, go to a club that has your language in it. And you can I was surprised. Like I'm learning Russian and part of me was like, oh, there's probably nothing there. I Googled it and there's like 10 spots all around that do Russian classes where you can meet people. And it's just a really cool thing that's more connected. And yeah, I would definitely agree, I think, with you on the dating apps. I've tried them. And even aside from the whole swiping thing, Matt Walsh had a really great quote that said, dating apps have made dating cheap, where you can just, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of knock someone off just because, oh, I don't like this little thing. But even beyond that, sometimes I would find a profile, be like, oh, this person seems kind of cool. Read through the description. She kind of ticks the boxes, so to say, like Christian, is in for a long term relationship. And then I go to actually talk to her, and she's just none of those things. And so that I think, with sometimes there is dishonesty
Oh yeah,
in those dating apps. And
it's easy to lie, and it's also easy. Those apps, uh, just like any system, it teaches you something if you use it enough. And what those apps teach you is to make snap judgments of people that may or may not be accurate at all. And that's a bad habit to get into. And it's not. It's again. It's if it's your only way, it's probably better than nothing. Just if it's the thing that's going to force you to actually go out and try or whatever, it's probably better than nothing. But it just teaches you all sorts of bad stuff, in my opinion.
so we've covered dating, we've covered dating apps. Let's say someone in a relationship right now, what does a good and healthy relationship, what should that look like?
Good question, and very broad. I would say, to just harken back to what we were talking about before, a relationship is healthy if both folks are being honest with each other, are communicating with each other about expectations, and are putting the other person's needs, wants, and desires ahead of their own. That is going to be what leads to a a healthy dating relationship, the same way it's going to lead to a healthy friendship, a healthy marriage. It's just that in a dating relationship and in a marriage, those priorities matter more because the relationship is matters more.
The NIH had a study, and they found out that the primary reasons relationships fail are disproportionately two things: lack of commitment and infidelity. What does commitment mean in modern relationships, and why have so many people become as unfaithful as they are?
So I would start by asking, are we talking about marriages or not? Because the marriage is a commitment. That is the commitment. And so if I haven't looked at the NIH's study, but if folks are lacking commit, the end of a marriage is always a lack of commitment. That's 100% out of 100%. If your marriage ends, then one of the boxes that ticks is lack of commitment on one party or the other, because that's the only way it could happen. Because a marriage is a commitment. It's a vow you make till death do you part. And so if it fails, then one party or the other had a lack of commitment. So I don't think that's a statistic that should go up or down. It's going to be 100% in a marriage situation. Infidelity, the second part of your question was about infidelity. So divorce rates have been going down for a while. They went up for a long time, but they've been going down since 80 something. And so I don't know that people these days are any more unfaithful than any other time. I would have to see something that proved that to me, because I don't know that that's true. I think people have been unfaithful differently in different times based on opportunity and technology and things like that. I think those things change. But I would imagine that, if you had somebody who had access to all the information, you would find that adultery, for instance, is probably pretty steady across human history. Um, it's just that it looks different at different times. And so I don't know. I don't know that I would even acknowledge that we're more unfaithful these days than we used to be. I don't know that there's evidence for that. I think the issues that we face now are the same that humans have always faced, which is that we don't want to stick to our commitments. We don't want to keep our vows. We are selfish. Everybody, everywhere, always throughout human history has battled the selfishness and the pride of the human heart, and there's no getting around that in any age. And it just looks kind of different sometimes. But people lack commitment. People get divorced. People, whatever the reason is, it at root, it is selfishness. And that hasn't changed. It just looks different now.
Yeah, when you say that, a part of me wonders if I don't know what studies it affects, but I know some studies where they go around and they ask a broad group of people a particular question. Sometimes the type of person that replies leans heavily in one direction. So it might be the type of people who cheat a lot are more inclined to respond to a survey, whereas someone who does it kind of there or doesn't do it at all is kind of going to throw it in the trash. And so the results of that may be skewed a bit.
It also could be, again, I have to
Mm-hmm.
look at the study or whatever, but if it's including more than marriage, if it's just relationships generally end because
Mm-hmm.
of a lack of commitment or a lack of faithfulness, I could see that increase the lack of commitment to a relationship in the age of dating apps. I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you, if you're not just considering marriages, if you're considering dating relationships, for instance, the dating app way of doing things is going to lead to people more easily just leaving one relationship and
Mm-hmm.
saying, so the lack of commitment there is just they were never committed in the first place. They demonstrated the lack of commitment at some point along the way, and they were never, because this way of dating is a lack of commitment, with one way of looking at it. So I could see if that's what they're talking about, that increasing, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
um, and also the number of people who are entering a relationship, and what they're calling unfaithfulness is the fact that they're dating them and then they're looking at their phone and being like, oh, this person's prettier, now I'm choosing this person, all right, we're breaking up, I'm going with this person.
Mm-hmm.
Calling that unfaithfulness is, it's somewhat true, but it's not the same thing as unfaithfulness in marriage.
It reminds me, I forget what, I want to say it was the New York Times, it might have been a different paper, had a headline that was like the rise of polyamorous relationships or the case against monogamy or some strange thing.
Yeah,
um,
those are, yeah, I mean, we
yeah, it's it's
every subculture gets more attention in the age of the internet.
mm,
um, but I mean, I would put probably 98% of that phenomenon is due to pornography. Like that.
mm.
I think people underestimate. Have you heard of the book "I Kiss Dating Goodbye"?
I have. I don't know the
Okay,
author of it, but I have. I did hear of that.
okay. It was written by a guy named Josh Harris back in the, I think, the early '90s, and it was kind of what I was talking about earlier about, like, it was one of the things that was sort of pushing back against. All
Hmm.
right, teens, calm down. Don't and people hate it now or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But if you wrote that book for teenagers today, it could just be literally two chapters. The first one would be, hey kids, stop looking at pornography and having your
Mm-hmm.
expectations absolutely ruined and damaged by it. And number two, put down your phone and go actually talk to people.
Hmm.
And that's it. It's just that shift is why you see things like the New York Times finding tons of people who are like, you know, I'm married, but guess what? I'll just do whatever I want anyways,
Mm-hmm.
because they have always viewed uh, sex through the prism of this is about me and my pleasure. So, and also my spouse agrees with that because they think it's also about them and their pleasure. And we now agree that we should go bring somebody else into this. And that is the pornography addled mind of people these days that's affecting all that.
Hmm. There was a study that was done. One of like the top porn sites on the globe did a yearly count, and it was something like 5 billion visits a year it averages. But back in 2019, it was something, I want to say it was like 49 billion. Like it was basically half the world is watching this, and so it doesn't
Yep. Well,
surprise me that.
and kids grow up on it now, so it's younger and
Hmm.
younger. This is one of the reasons why parents shouldn't give their kids, you know, smartphones. But
Hmm.
it's a it's kids are getting introduced to it before they know what a real relationship looks like, and so they then have that in their mind as they start to figure out what real relationships look like, and it just messes everything up. It cannot be overstated the damage that that's doing.
What qualities do you think young people should have that would help them in their relationships? Maybe something that you notice that is lacking a lot, or um, something that a lot of people tend to just not have that's important.
It goes to, so the thing that I uh, first noticed about my wife was that she not first noticed. I first noticed that she was quite attractive. That was the first thing I noticed. But when I began to get to know her, um, one of the first things that I noticed about her was that while she was very opinionated, um, sarcastic, would argue with me about things. When it came to anything serious, she was thoughtful and took things into consideration in a way that struck me as humble and somebody who was willing to learn.
Hmm.
Which told me she was capable of being unselfish and capable of being the type of person who can lay down parts of herself. And that was it was attractive to me, and it's what I was looking for, and I think it's what folks should look for,
Hmm.
because you could have most every other good characteristic, but if you're not willing to give up something about yourself for another person, you can't be married.
Hmm.
You're incapable of being married. And so what I tell everybody is, once you're at the point where you're like, should I really marry this person? You just ask yourself, am I willing to lay down parts of myself for her? And do I think that she's willing to lay down parts of herself for me? And if it's true, you've found somebody rare, and if it's not, you shouldn't marry them.
Hmm.
And it's the most, for me, that would be the way that I sum up the most important thing to be looking for.
Self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice, willingness to learn,
Hmm.
and willingness to learn from you. So a lot of people like, um, I'm willing to learn from somebody who I know is an expert on something that I don't know anything about. That doesn't take any special humility. It's just it's normal. Every sort of and natural. We humans, if you know somebody's really good at something or an expert on something, you're like, okay, let me listen to you about that thing. What's rare is for somebody in a relationship to be willing to learn from the person they're in the relationship with on something that's more vague than like, are you in, on relational stuff on, like, let me give you an example because I'm not being clear. Me and Lauren approach, well, Lauren is my wife. Me and her approach conflict wildly differently. I First of all, I generally avoid it, and she doesn't. But even when in conflict, my approach is more, let's talk through this, let's work through it, let's draw each other out, and let's resolve it now, because I don't want to, I don't go to bed in anger or whatever, the scripture. Let's just get this done so that it's resolved and we don't have to deal with it anymore. And so let's do that. And her approach, she's less conflict averse. And when she's in conflict, she doesn't care if it's resolved right then, as long as you have it out.
Hmm.
Like, have it out, still be mad about it. 3 days later, doesn't matter. But then you just move on. You don't actually have to resolve the conflict for her. It's more of like, you heard what I said, you know what I think. And I'm more like, wait, no, we have to agree at some point about this. We have to reach a resolution. And we're just totally different in the way that we approach conflict. We have, over the course of our marriage, just both gone each other's direction. I'm less the way that I used to be. She's less the way that she used to be. We're still different about it. We still approach it differently, but we have gone towards each other. And I've been able to see the wisdom of her approach. She's been able to see the wisdom of my approach. And it's never perfect, but we learn from each other. And the willingness to do that type of thing, of like, that's not something where um, there's a right answer, as long as neither of you are like being outrageous about it. It's an approach, and there's wisdom to both, and we're coming towards each other. We're just learning from each other different aspects of how to relate to somebody, and the willingness to be humble enough to say, I'm just actually going to become different about the way I approach conflict, because you are better in this way than me at it. And I recognize that, I'm going to do it. And then her ability to say, and I'm going to change the way that I approach conflict because you're better in this way than me. And we come together. That type of way of approaching relationship, that type of humility, that just doesn't happen all the time. And it's something, if you don't have it, eventually it's going to uh, lead to a breakdown of the relationship. There has to be some element of that ability to just submit yourself to the other person. That's
Mm,
just very, very, very important.
nice. Yeah, it reminds me of Jordan Peterson had a, I forget, it was on some kind of council, and he said, you want to marry someone you can spar with. And what he meant by that was you want someone who's interestingly different, because if they're not, you'll get bored, right? And so you don't want someone that is going to seek conflict, but someone who is going to challenge who you are, going to challenge some of the ideas that you have, and is not going to be afraid to speak their mind or speak the truth when necessary. It's a great, I think, a good thing to remember
Yeah, good.
when looking for partners.
Yeah, you do not want to go into a relationship where um, the person is either is not capable of or doesn't want to ever
Mm-hmm.
challenge, ever spar, ever. If they're just going to let you be you and I'll be me, that's not a marriage.
What do you think about long distance relationships?
Again, I don't think it's ideal. I don't recommend people go looking for it. I don't know that there's any. Um, it certainly can work. It's worked plenty of times for plenty of people. So it's just not. Again, it's very difficult. Because I think relationships happen best in community, just generally. Like if I'm gonna, develop a even as now that we've been married, for me and Lauren, like developing friendships with other folks, it's much easier when you're with them, when you are, and not just with them, once every 2 months, but like you're building your lives together. That's when it's easier to develop a relationship. And so I think that obviously happens more easily when you're uh, close, and when you can, because of proximity, you can develop that type of, or you can be in the same community and then develop the relationship from there. I think that's ideal. That's what I would think is best for most people. Um, but I wouldn't ever say, never date remotely. I think for seen it work enough that I know that it can. It probably takes a different type of person or a different type of intentionality um, to make it work. You just have to be aware that you're going to have to do more work to
Mm,
actually learn who the other person is that way, because it's part of how I knew that I should marry Lauren had to do with seeing her interact with people didn't have anything to do with me. See her, see her with her family, see her with her siblings, see her with her friends, um, and that was very valuable to me. And it would have taken far longer and would have been much more difficult to see all that if I wasn't in the same church with her, if I wasn't around her.
mm. It sounds to me like what you're describing is courtship. Would that be a good,
Um,
like, when, because we you mentioned like the long distance dating, sometimes it doesn't work. Like my cousin, his fiance, long distance relationship for a while, and it worked out very very well.
yeah.
But like I have another friend, and he's had a couple long distance relationships, and they haven't worked. And then towards the end there, you were talking about it's really good to have that community of meeting the family, of getting to know the person well. And it sounds a little to me like a definition of courtship, but is that or am I not quite?
So the distinction that I would make between dating and courtship is more of the just intentionality behind what you're doing.
Hmm,
So a courtship is just more actively, I'm trying to pursue this person in order to marry them.
hmm,
And so once you get to the point where you are courting somebody, it's just like built on the word itself. Once you're courting somebody, you're trying to win them basically. Whereas dating is more of just the um, we are both actively trying to figure out what we're doing here. And so I don't know that. And when you're in the stage of dating, is, I think, when you actually need more of what I was talking about with learning the things about the person through watching them in their life and not just how they interact with you. Because people, part of the thing you were talking about earlier with the dating apps is like people can lie. Well, people can lie also to you, to your face when you're dating. And to kind of decipher whether that's going on or not is you kind of need to see them in context other than the just talking one on one with you and just see them in their life. Can you someone it's much easier to determine if somebody's trustworthy and the person that they're presenting themselves as if you see them in other contexts other than dating you. If you see them and how they live their life with their family, with their church, with their community. And so by the time you get to the no, I'm going to court you because I want to convince you you should marry me, kind of you should have already figured out the relational stuff, in my opinion.
I like the idea of asking for the parents' permission before dating a girl. And so I would want to, before I even like ask the girl out, uh, ask the parents, hey, can I date your daughter? More or less. Do you think that that is a good framework to have, or do you think, given the modern environment, it's an unrealistic standard to abide by?
That is entirely a contingent question. I think it is a good thing to have that in your mind when you are approaching this stuff because there are going to be times where that is the wise and smart and kind thing to do. And there are also going to be times where it's completely impractical. And so I don't think it should be a standard of like, I need to do this every time. But I think it is very wise to be thinking that way because there are going to be times where that is the correct thing to do. And you could easily come up with scenarios. How old are you, by the way?
I'm 20. I'll
Okay.
be
So,
21 in a few months.
if you, let's say you meet a 21-year-old, start to get to know her, and you're like, oh, wait, I might want to date this person. But then you find out that uh, she's got a single mom who she just really hates, and the dad's been out of the picture for years. It's just not going to be practical. You're not going to worry about it at that point. And so there may be somebody, a trusted pastor or somebody that you can go to and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and get input from them on whether this is a good idea for you to date her or not. I think that's wise. I think thinking generally that way about an approach to dating is wise. I just think it's going to be contingent on the circumstances.
Hmm. Like, seek the counsel of a bunch of different people to see if they would say, yeah, she's good, or yeah, I wouldn't recommend dating her. I see this red flag here.
Yeah, it's going to be part of learning about her and finding out whether it's her parents or somebody else who are the folks who really know her and talk to them. Absolutely. And if it's a dad, if it's an actual authority figure, then it could look more like getting permission rather than getting counsel.
Hmm.
Um, so but that'll just depend on the type of relationship that she has with her parents.
Okay, so when you're dating someone, you want to make sure that they are the type of person who is self sacrificing and someone that you would sacrifice for. Ideally, it should be in a community environment where you can interact with people that she knows and introduce her to people that you know, whether that's family, friends, get counsel. Let's say someone has all of that and the guy's like, okay, how do I know if I want to marry this girl? At what point in the relationship should the guy consider, okay, really good girl? When does he decide to propose to that woman? What are the things need to be, what ducks need to be lined up for him to get the green light on that?
There is the fundamental answer, and then there's the more practical answer. The fundamentals are are you uh, assuming that this is a Christian person asking
Mm.
this question? If you're a Christian, is she a Christian? Number one. Number two, are you both committed to being married um, forever? If those two things are true, you can get married and nothing else matters. But those are two very big things. They're an actual Christian, and also they are actually committed to a lifelong covenant that they're never going to break.
Mm.
So if you can answer those two in the positive confidently, good to go. Now, practically, first of all, knowing that for sure is a little difficult. Um, but secondarily, the other party and parents and friends are going to have more concerns than whether or not you're both Christians and committed to keeping your vows. They're going to want to know, like, how are you going to do this? Are you going to, be able to provide, and are you actually going to be miserable, or are you going to be happy with each other? Because you could stay married your whole life very miserably, and it honors the Lord to do that, but it's not ideal. You'd rather be happy, and so the compatibility issues come in and things like that. But if you have been dating somebody and you reach the point where you're confident this is somebody who who is going to approach marriage the same way that I am, which is going to be with full commitment, and we're going to learn from each other, and we're going to grow together, and we are we're fully committed to this, and we love each other. Then it just comes down to practicalities. Like, is right now the correct time, or
Mm.
should we wait a little bit until I'm through X education and I'm going to be ready to provide better. You can get into the practical aspects of it, but um, fundamentally, if you're whether you're, I got married at Lauren was 20 when we got married. I was 23. She was about to turn 21, and so age to me, my parents got married when they were 18. Um, I think generally people these days wait too long to get married rather than getting married too quickly. And so, as a general rule, I would say it's really comes down to the very basics. And once you have those, you really love each other. You're willing to learn, submit to the other one, and you're committed to maintaining a covenant. You're good to go. You just got to figure out the practical stuff.
Oh, so
Just like, are you ready to, you know, can you get married? Do you have a job? Can you move into a place
gotcha.
together? Or things like that. And again, you get it. You can get into like all kinds of stuff in terms of like how you would know whether or not this person is for you. In terms of, for instance, one of the things for me was I really, really prioritized. I wanted to homeschool my kids, and so somebody had come along who was like, it's good in a lot of ways, but she hates the idea of homeschooling. That would have been a struggle for me personally. So there's other things that come up that sort of are obviously going to influence people. And I would say, don't jump into a marriage when there's something like that hanging over you. Don't just be like, we'll figure it out.
Hmm.
No, work through it. Figure it out now. Don't figure it out after you get married. Figure it out now. And if the other person is is not going to come to your side on the issue, you've got to decide whether you're going to lay it down and that's worth getting married or not. So there's
Hmm.
stuff like that where you have to, in my opinion, just exercise like normal wisdom. Don't jump into something without figuring out whether you can live with it or not. Um, to me, that's more like just common sense than anything else. It's, I knew for myself that would have been a big struggle if that hadn't been, but she was on board with it. It was like, it's perfect. I didn't have to worry about it anymore. But if she hadn't been, that would have been a big thing that either I would have had to have laid down beforehand going into the marriage. Like, all right, I have to be open to and not bitter if we don't end up homeschooling my kids.
Hmm.
I needed to figure that out before we got married, because it would have been so. There's people need to know themselves well enough to know whether there are those types of issues. Kids is another thing. It's like if you're going to marry somebody, you probably know whether or not they want to have kids or not. You need to figure
Very
that out ahead of
important.
time, right? And if you know if you're not on the same page about that, don't just assume you're going to figure it out after you get married.
Hmm.
Um, so there's all what I would say common sense wisdom stuff to figure out ahead of time. I'm just sort of assuming that
Hmm.
as a if you can work those things out, and you're never going to anticipate every single one, which is why the commitment to you got to find somebody who's committed to maintaining their vows no matter what. You don't want to marry somebody who lacks commitment, and the first time you run into an issue that you didn't think of before you got married, and now you're actually fighting about a real big issue, is like, well, it's not going to work. So they're not primary issues, but they are things that I would highly recommend figuring out as many of them as possible beforehand.
Hmm. Yeah, that last part you said about like the seriousness. I do think there's almost a lack of seriousness that people take towards marriages, but vows in particular. I don't think people understand that a vow literally means it's a sacred promise. So it's not just you promising that you're going to do these things, but also that there's a holiness around the vows that you're making. And a lot of times, I've had the privilege of going to a number of weddings, and very often the vows will be like, I'm gonna make you a cup of coffee in the morning, and you're like, you're really making that? That's the vow you're making. They make you a cup of coffee.
Um,
But even the basics, like to having to hold till death do us part. Like people don't realize that that's a big thing that you're committing to, and so if you're going to make that commitment, you need to be genuinely serious about doing so, and both people need to be on board about that. And I think you've mentioned a couple times that there's a level of maturity that both people need to have, and a lot of times they don't have that maturity when they're teenagers, and they don't really realize that when they're trying to be married, that's you're making these very very large commitments, these lifetime commitments, and they're extraordinarily important and serious. And a lot of people, I guess, do you think that there's, am I right in saying that there's people who just don't, marriage and relationships have been, are not something that is taken as a big deal? It's kind of considered, oh, it's I have my boyfriend, I have my husband. They're just, it's not, it's a very unserious, not uh, focused. You're doing it for the fun, for the emotions, and you're not really doing it because you want to be with the person. Is that something that you've noticed, or
oh yeah,
what is your thoughts on
oh
that?
yeah, and or people sort of sleepwalk into it where they've been in a relationship for 5 years. They're like, I guess we should get married. Like, let's just make this formal. Um, and so, yes, I think I see all that. And again, I don't think that's necessarily new. We, as for a long time as a society, marriage, like no fault divorce, happened like in the 70s, I think, or something like that, where it just became the law of the land, basically, and it just sort of reflected where culture was at. It's like if if you want to get divorced, you just got to be able to get divorced, and that hadn't been the case up to that point because marriage held a place in society of esteem and honor that the vow was more important, I think, than it is now, and it's not good. Um, and it is something that uh, you really, really, really have to figure out before you get married. It's to go into a marriage and you don't really know, you're not convinced that the other person is serious about the till death do us part, which will mean, by the way, they have to learn to lay down parts of themselves. Like some people, known people who would say, absolutely, I consider this vow sacred and will never, ever, ever get divorced. Also, I'm not going to change anything about myself and I'm going to behave abusively towards my wife.
Hmm.
But I'm really committed to the vow of staying married. It's like, well, no, but you don't know what it means to actually be married.
Hmm.
You don't know how to lay anything down. You know how to get your way. And now that you're married, getting your way means staying married. And so, yeah, you know how to keep a vow, sort of. Not really, though, because part of the vow is that you lay down your life for the other person. And if you're incapable of doing that, what are we even talking about? And so it goes, I've see it in all different kind of ways. Folks who just simply refuse to, uh, just don't know what a vow means, don't know what it means to be married, and um, and sometimes it manifests itself in somebody who's just weakly committed to the marriage, and sometimes it manifests itself in somebody who's very strongly committed to a marriage that they are absolutely in control of.
Hmm.
And you don't want to get married to either one of those people.
Hmm. Like you don't want to get married to someone who is kind of you do everything, I'm good, or someone who's saying I will do everything, you don't have to worry about it, sort of
Yeah,
person.
just
Yeah.
very tightly committed to the staying married part, but not tightly
Hmm.
committed to the what it actually means to be a spouse part,
Hmm.
uh, and the laying down your life for the other person part. You can, if you're a person who's very committed to keeping a vow, for the sake of keeping a vow, but you're not committed to changing who you are in order to become more Christ-like and to serve your spouse, you don't know what it means to be married.
Hmm. So something my mom used to tell me that as I did, it just stuck with me, and she said, "Getting married is the easy part. Staying married is the hard part." What has been something you have noticed, either in your relationship or in other relationships, where it's been a difficult thing you've had to work through? How do people remain married in how do people stay married, and what are a couple of the difficulties that come in marriage? I think that's a better question.
The difficulty, let's take, like, set like infidelity to the side for a second. Like, let's not consider that, because that's like, I honestly believe there could be people in marriages that they're committed to who just stumble and fall in sin and then repent fully and want to come back, and I think those situations are uniquely terrible, and are one thing that can happen. Um, but they're so individual. There's nothing really to be said about them. Um, I think every marriage will be difficult when those times come when you are not on the same page about something, when you just completely disagree with how to approach a life circumstance, like, say, uh, whether it's a job opportunity that the husband thinks he should take, the wife's like, we're not moving. Um, whether it's how to you actually get into raising kids and realize you just have wildly different approaches to how you should raise children. You, after a few years, realize, oh my gosh, when I was uh, really attracted to this person, I just overlooked all their faults, and now their faults are glaring, and it's drives me crazy. There's all sorts of stuff that can happen over the course of a marriage that make being married difficult. Um, the solution to most of them is, it's going to sound so retardedly basic, but it's just humility.
Hmm.
It is recognizing that you yourself need help and grace and love and aren't perfect and are annoying in some ways and don't think things through perfectly. It's the humility of, whether it's a decision that you feel strongly about, the humility to say, but I don't actually know that this is right. I think
Hmm.
it is. I think very strongly about it, but I don't know. And even if you ultimately end up making that decision, just the humility to work through it with your spouse from the perspective of, I don't know. I think we should do this, but let me hear you. Let's work through it. Whatever decision we make, let's make it together. The humility to approach it that way. The humility to approach, if you completely disagree about certain aspects of raising children. It's like, okay, we're going to have to work on this together. I'm going to have to lay down some things about the way that I would do this. But and then try to work to get them to do the same thing. But just that humility is very, very, very important and very, very necessary, because the issues are always they're gonna be unique to every marriage. Every marriage is going to have some unique aspect to it that makes it not fun at times or difficult or whatever. And for some folks, it's much more constant than for other folks, and that can be a burden. I don't want to minimize that. I've been lucky in mine in that sense, that these issues are few and far between, and it seems like we can work through them, and that everything's we're just very happy with each other most of the time. So when the issues and the conflict and the irritations and annoyances are constant, having that humility has got to be much, 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 much more difficult. But that's the answer.
Having a lot of humility. Yeah, and humility is hard. Like, I jokingly say that I'm very, very humble, and in some places, like, I do try. One of the things that really humbled me was I started doing Aikido Jiu-Jitsu, which is the root martial art that like Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a bunch of these martial arts came from. And literally class number one, you're like, oh, I could probably beat someone up. And then you just immediately realize that you are powerless and everyone
Yep.
around you could kill you.
Incredible.
Yeah, and it's one
So,
of
but
those things that's like,
that's a
yeah,
great illustration, actually, because that is, most of us go through life sort of with that perspective of ourselves. It doesn't have to be in the fighting arena. It's like we go into our decisions seem wiser than everybody else's all the time. I know how to approach this. I have good thoughts about this. I am, everyone overestimates their own looks. Like, it's just, in most aspects of life, we need those moments to remind us, you think way too highly of yourself. And when you get those moments, like that for you was like humbling things, like, oh, but it was like very specific. I remember early in our marriage, I did sort of think that I was very good at conflict. I had the correct approach. First of all, don't jump into it all the time. Like, if you can just, sometimes you just let it go, let it go. And also, when you get into it, you approach it like, hey, we're just gonna talk about it. We don't have to yell, blah 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 blah. And I just had a very high opinion of my own approach to conflict. And then, like, 3 years into marriage, when we got into a couple serious conflicts, and I realized, oh, I suck at this. Oh, I'm terrible at this. And also, what I thought of as her terrible approach to conflict, like immature, because it struck me as, oh, you think conflict's just about getting mad and never actually solving anything. That's ridiculous. So I had like this very arrogant view of the way that I approach conflict versus her. And it took her approach, like I saw her approach actually solve conflicts and mine fail to a couple of times. And I had that moment, oh my gosh, actually, I'm not that good at this. I have one aspect I have some wisdom on this, but the way that I actually, first of all, implement that is not great. And also, I only have one aspect of this. She has a different aspect, and really we could sort of be putting it. But that to me was like a big eye opening. Oh my gosh, something I prided myself on of being good at. Actually, I kind of sucked at it, and so and that can happen. It happened with you. It can happen in any number of arenas, but we need those moments, and we need to have the humility to, when those moments come, not respond with, you know, stubborn. Nah, no. That's not really what the Lord's saying.
yeah, yep. There's a, and it's hard too, especially when you're talking, especially when it's you feel God's calling you to move your location, and you're just not sure. One of the tips that Darren Slack gave me was just a lot of times if you think it's God, you have to just do the action. But it gets very difficult when like you think, okay, this is the action I'm supposed to do. Let me do this action. But then your wife, your husband's like, I don't really want to do that, and you're like, well, shoot, I thought this was what God's telling me to do,
Yep.
and you gotta work through that
Yep.
and
Oh
get
yeah.
it done.
Yep. Those opportunities are the moments where you find out how your marriage is going.
Yep. Yeah. Do you think there's any expectations people bring into marriage that are just unrealistic, or they have these dreamy moments that just don't actually occur?
Oh, yes. I think that probably varies person to person, but um, common ones will be again going to keep bringing it up, but it infects everything. Is people go into marriage assuming that it's going to solve issues of lust or something like that. It's not going to solve anything if it's going to um, give you one outlet for it if that's your problem, but it's not going to solve anything. So people go into it with sort of bizarre expectations when it comes to that. I think people go into it assuming that the way that they've approached the relationship in dating, courtship, engagement, and everything like that is that it's going to be sort of a linear progression moving forward, and that's just not the way it works. It's uh, relationships are not on linear progressions, and they're going to go all sorts of wild different directions based on circumstance and based on the fact that people change. And so the person that you're marrying is not going to be the exact same person in 10 years. Um, and that's not an excuse to break a covenant. That's the whole point of a covenant, is that it doesn't matter that if somebody changes. It does matter in terms of the way that you relate to them, but it doesn't matter in terms of your vow. Um, but I think a lot of people just expect that the person that they're marrying is just that's who that person is going to be, or they expect them to grow in exactly the ways that they want. Like, oh, I'm sure this person will get better at this thing I want them to get better at after we're married, or whatever. And so, all those, I mean, these are just like normal human expectations, but when you put them into the marriage context, it makes things difficult later on. Um, so those are the main ones that come to mind.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of a quote from Alex Hermosi that says, if you find a girl who believes in your dreams more than you do, who makes you want to be a better man, who's willing to work alongside you to get there, and is grateful for whatever you have right now, just marry her. Because at the end of the day, your spouse marries two people, the person you are and the person you want to become. Make sure she loves both.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I read that and I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. It was kind of, especially that last part, like
Yeah.
really, that was really like eye
Yeah.
opening.
The
And
only thing the only thing I would add, and obviously that you just read
yeah.
one little clip of the quote or whatever, but the only thing that I would add is you need somebody who also is going to love you when you fail to meet those expectations,
Mm,
which is inevitably going to happen. You want the person to love who you are. That you want them to love what you aspire to be, and you also want them to be capable of loving you when you fail to reach those aspirations, or when you just fail, when you sin,
mm,
when you want somebody who has that Christ-like love of, um, despite what you do at times, I'm going to love you, not because of what you do. Um, and so, yeah, I would just tack that on to the end of that quote.
mm. Awesome. I lost my place in my questions. I have like these quotes at the very bottom that I
Oh
thought
yeah,
were
yeah.
just
So you went
great,
back.
but like
Yep.
I don't want to bring them up unless it's relevant. Uh, uh, Men and women's roles. There's
Oh, just that light topic.
yes, there's a lot of I think women who are very empowered from the feminist side of things. There's a lot of men who are. Then you have the opposite of that. Like you have the Andrew Tate guys who are just these macho guys, and they just too extreme one direction. And then you have like the guys who just are the opposite of the Andrew Tates, who don't do anything. They're kind of in their shells. They don't do it. And then I haven't noticed women who are kind of in their shells and don't do much, but maybe I just haven't met them. And I think
Yeah,
that
you haven't met them. You haven't met them because they're in their
okay,
shell.
that's good. Um, but yeah, what with their kind of these extremes here, what roles should men and women be playing in relationships?
I think you're already on to you. I think you intuitively are hitting at the answer there. I think people make way too much of the idea and the word roles. I think like the fact that that's the word that we use a lot is can be just unhelpful in my opinion. Um, and you've already hit on there. You've got the extremes on all sides, um, and then you have the folks who would argue there just should be no differences anywhere. And to me, that's also an extreme. Like that's it sounds like it's the middle position, but it's actually just an extreme perspective coming at it from a different angle. Uh, Men and women are different for the most part, um, and men should not shy away from being men, and women shouldn't shy away from being women. And that's going to, not look the same for every man, and it's not going to look the same for every woman. And some of this should be common sense, like masculinity um, isn't always going to look the exact same with everybody. And I think we get into, especially if you're on the end of, you're trending towards I mean, Andrew Tate's like an extreme lunatic version of it, but like, even if you're headed that sort of direction, the idea could be that you just view masculinity as uh, machismo or whatever, and that's not what masculinity is. Jesus uh, was perfectly masculine, and he was meek and mild. And so there's just and yeah, and people will always respond to that with, yeah, but then he threw over the temple tables. It's like, okay, yes, he one time he got mad and threw some stuff, but he as a his typical way that he walked through life was he had immense power at his disposal, and he was always under control. He was always contained, and he did not show off. When he did miracles, it was a demonstration of power, but it wasn't, look at my muscles and how I can destroy all of you, and like it's just a different thing. And he lived most of his life in obscurity and didn't do miracles. And so it's just people's idea of what masculinity should look like is so uh, uh, simple, basic, and blinkered. In my opinion, we don't need to be looking for men to be um, a a particular type of American macho something or whatever. On the other hand, we don't want to use Jesus as an excuse for men to walk around being, you know, finding ways out of being real men.
Hmm.
And I think that's, that there's the temptation is there one way or the other with various men, which is why you see people making arguments for various ends of the spectrum of either uh, all masculinity is toxic or masculinity should be these lunatic manosphere guys. Um, so it's when you get right down to then uh, how roles apply to relationships. Again, if you're thinking too much about it in terms of roles rather than just uh, be Christ-like, I think you're probably going to get yourself into trouble.
Hmm. So
I do think.
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add real quick on that. Um, when you get into the theological part of it, it can get fun and interesting to talk about. Um, but I think most relationships just need uh, men who are not afraid to provide and be a man and uh, lay down their lives uh, humbly for their wife. And I think that wives um, laying down their life for their husbands and serving is like, okay, it should be as simple as that. And with the when it comes to big decisions, if your default is, well, it just comes down to whatever the man thinks, well, you're an idiot, and that's not the way that it's going to work in any marriage that is worth anything. Um, and so, yeah, people just approach it like very. This is one of those issues where people approach it just as stupidly as possible most of the time.
Hmm. Yeah. So men should be as Christ-like as they can be, and strive to be like him. There was a JJ had this great quote. We were in Bible study. I want to see if I can find it. I wrote it down like he said it and it was amazing. Um, uh, don't ask what Jesus would do. Ask what Jesus would want you to do. Because you are not Jesus and he is God, God can do many things that you as a sinful human can't. And it was just such a it's true, right? And
Yeah. Oh,
so
yeah.
there's an element of being Christ-like that's yeah, you should strive for it, but also realize that you're not supposed to be going flipping tables in your church if they're selling merchandise or something. Like
Right.
that's Jesus was able to do that and not sin because he's God and he
Right.
understands that. You as a human do not understand that, and you can't just go around doing things like that.
That's exactly
Um,
right.
and it's very interesting you brought up the meekness. It's actually I've been trying to have a podcast on masculinity, and this idea of meekness has I've been thinking a lot about it and how it's become someone who is very dangerous but has yourself under control, right? That can you have the capability of either I want to say to like hurt people, but you are capable. You are someone who is strong, but you're not swinging your weight around, and it's this interesting balancing act between like being assertive, but you don't want to be overly. You don't want to become a dictator, right? You want to be humble, and you want to have self-respect, and you want to respect others and move forward. And it's what do you when you speak of meekness, what do you think are some ways people can, especially men, well, actually, men and women can have meekness? What are some practice things people can like practical things people can practice?
Yeah, I think so. Meekness as power under control, I think, is um, the easiest, most helpful way to think about it. Practically, in the way that we relate to people, I think the way that I've thought about it is I saw this with my dad and the way that he operated is he was never afraid to um, have everyone else having opinions of people making their case to him, but he also was not. You never got the impression that he was just going to do what somebody else said either. So it was. Uh, I think a lot of times, a lot of folks, if they, if again, if they're on the end of the spectrum where it's like, oh, I got to be a real man, somehow are afraid to take input and to make a decision based on somebody else's to acknowledge, okay, yep, that's the right way to go. It's a willingness and a comfort with and a confidence in your ability um, to receive and not feel like you're going to lose yourself to that and become
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed by it, because the typical weak person would just, that's whatever anybody inputs in, then I'm going to do that thing. And the over masculine person is like, I'm not listening. I'm just going to do whatever I want. Whereas the meek person has the ability to receive, consider, and then make a decision. And it's both. And so that's what I just, I've seen that with that. And then in my own marriage, I actually see this characteristic in my wife quite a bit, where she has this, no one could ever accuse her of allowing herself to be walked over. She is, she's feisty, as they say. Um, but it doesn't keep her from listening and hearing folks out and conversing and working through, and she's just not afraid of having her mind changed by somebody else if that's what it takes. Um, and so she sort of has also demonstrated to me just that type of, it's there's strength there. She's not going to get walked over. Um, but it's combined with a humility and a control of, I'm also not just going to do whatever the heck I want whenever I want to. I'm going to have this input into my life.
Hmm. So it sounds like for people to be meek, you want to have humility and have standards, but also be willing to have those standards changed if someone presents an opposing viewpoint is that you find to be true. And is that a good?
Yes, and I would add one other element to it, which is the willingness to um, think that you are. I'm trying to think of an example. To think that you are right, but give it up anyways.
Hmm.
And that, because that happens in marriage quite a bit. It's like, I actually, you didn't persuade me. We're still going to do it your way. And that not be some sort of crushing thing of, I just gave up. It's like, no, this time, no problem. I don't agree, but we're just going to go your direction. Um, I think that takes strength to do. But obviously, it's also the humble thing to do. And so I think meekness is not always taking the input and then doing what you want. Sometimes it's taking the input and doing what you don't want for the sake of the other person.
Hmm. Some look. It sounds like a bit like self-sacrifice, and yeah, going back to what we were saying earlier about
Yeah.
that, and so I I think my audience is very predominantly Christian, and I have a feeling there's gonna be a few people who bring up the Bible verse that everyone loves to say and that everyone hates at the same time, which is, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, and husbands, love your wives as Christ has loved the church. What does
All
that
right.
mean for husbands? What does it mean for wives? What is submission and loving your wife like Christ and the church look like?
Um, I think this is so. Let me go find it just a second.
No worries.
It is one of these things where I think people are just afraid to, because it has been uh, overdone, then it makes people squeamish about just saying what it says. Um, so the previous verse, if you, because it's in like in the ESV version, it has this section called wives and husbands, and it starts with, the wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. But if you go to the previous, and those sections are obviously not there in the Greek, by the way, they're just, put there to help us break down things. But it's not as though in the Greek it's like, okay, now it's this new section called wives and husbands that's imposed on it by
Hmm.
people. So anyways, previous verse, or previous couple verses. Don't get drunk with wine, for that's debauchery. Be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns, spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives,
Hmm.
submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of his church, his body, and himself Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, also wives should submit to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So if you think of it in terms of as one continuous thing, the context for the wives submit to your husbands and husbands love your wives is in the context of submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Hmm.
And this is an application of that Paul is drawing out. So it's submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And here's an application of how to do that. Husbands and wives, I'm going to talk to you specifically. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. And so I think he says husbands are in this picture like Christ is the head of the church. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. What do we know about the way that Christ loves the church? He just literally laid down his life for it.
Hmm.
And so, if any version of the way that you think about this verse doesn't include uh, husbands who are willing to lay down their lives, and a lot of times people go, "Well, yeah, of course, I'll take a bullet for my wife." No, this is talking about lay down your life that you're living. So, put her needs above your own.
Hmm.
Lay down your wants and desires and dreams. You should be willing to do that for your wife. Now, he doesn't use the word submit; it's a different word,
Hmm.
and he does use the word submit to the wives. But what he's in the context of submitting to one another out of reverence, and then saying to husbands, "Be willing to lay down everything for the good of your wife." It's very hard to then get to what he means by wives submit to your husbands is they get their way and you don't. That's just it cannot be what he's talking about. What he's talking about is wives do not take over this marriage. Do not think that you're the one who is in charge. Approach your relationship with your husband as one who is submitting, sort of in the same way I just said, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ to the church. If a member of a church at our particular church, when you take the vows of membership, you basically say, and we submit to uh, the what is it called, the Book of Church Order. We submit ourselves to the eldership of this church, and that doesn't mean that we don't, when the preacher is up there preaching, we don't analyze what he's saying and decide if it's according to the Word of God, and if it's not, it's not like we just submit to it in the sense of, well, we made a vow we would submit, and he just said something unbiblical, but I guess we got to do it now. That's not what this means. And in the same way, wives are not supposed to submit to their husbands in the sense of, oh, what he says goes, I guess we're doing that. It's submit in the sense of the way that you approach your life should be like a Christian in a church, basically humbly saying, what my life is about is this person and this thing, and I'm submitted under that, and I am not going to try to overrule and blah blah blah. And I think, again, you can say I'm dancing around, and I can hear people saying, "No, you're dancing around the issue." What he really, when it comes right down to it, who's the boss? And my response to that would be, if that's the way that you're reading this verse, and that's the thing that you care about, you should be reading the part about laying your life down.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they read wives submit to your husbands, they think it's submission they think it's like this domination and submission type relationship where the man is this dominative figure who's doing everything and the woman just follows along. It seems to me that it's submission out of love and respect for the man that you're doing it, right? You're not submitting to a dictator. You're submitting to someone who is trying his best to become as Christ-like as he possibly can. And
And don't try to rule the marriage.
yeah,
That
yeah,
he's saying that to the woman. Don't try to rule this marriage.
mm-hmm.
Don't try to be you don't try to be the dictator of this marriage
Yes,
either.
mm-hmm.
You submit. And the Lord has called the husband to be the head of this family. That's all real. It's in there. He says that's part of it too, and we don't need to shy away from that. But what that looks like in an actual marriage where a husband is basically also submitting. Again, he uses a different word, and people don't want to.
Hmm.
He says submit, to one another earlier,
Hmm.
and which is an interesting thing to say, by the way, submit to one another. And it's, how do you even do that? Um, how can you both be submissive? But that's sort of what he's saying. Submit to one another in marriage too. And it's going to look different for a wife and a husband, and the husband is the head. But the husband as the head, what he does with that is lays his life down.
Hmm.
He lays his life down for his wife. That's what he does with his leadership. And so it's, again, he's trying to paint a beautiful picture of the way uh, uh, marriage can work here, and people take it to then argue about who makes decisions, and that's just silly.
Yeah, it sounds like that it's submission. You're both submitting to Christ, trying to be as close to him as possible. But then also in a relationship, the man is the person who should be leading and the wife is not. And so the wife should follow the man, but only in as far as they're both pursuing God naturally. And so you wouldn't, if your pastor says something unbiblical, you're not just going to go, oh, well, because the pastor said it, it must be true, even if the
Right.
Bible disagrees with it. You would say, no, pastor, that's not correct. This
Right.
is this is what the Bible says. And so in the same way, wives, as long as what the husband is saying is in uh, soundness with what the Bible says, go along with it. But if it's not, if he's doing something unbiblical, you should call him out on that, and the husband should have the humility in and of himself to submit. He should have the meekness to
Right.
listen to his wife and say, oh no, yeah, you're right. This is an ungodly thing. I need to not do this.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a few more questions. I think they'll be a little bit, I don't want to say rapid fire,
Oh, that's
but
fine. We've talked a long
yeah,
time already.
we have. It's been like, what, an hour and a half? So it's
Yeah.
a
Something
while.
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well, once you get me talking, I never stop. So
you're good. Well, I don't know if these are rapid fire questions, but I'll ask them anyway. How do couples deal with conflict in relationships?
yeah. So I think I have touched on this one, so I'll just real quick
Okay.
say it again, which is me and my wife approached it differently, and
Mm-hmm.
I was more of the avoid it if you can, but if you have to get into it, then really resolve it, but do it in nice calm tones and with not yelling at each other, stuff like that. And her approach was more, when there's conflict, let's have it out right now. We don't have to solve it. We can just let each other know what we think, and maybe we'll approach it again tomorrow. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just move on like it never happened. And so we had these different approaches. I think generally in marriages, the way that folks approach conflict um, is what leads to divorces for the most
Okay.
part. It's because people can't figure out how to deal with conflict, and so it just grows and grows and grows and grows until they can't deal with it anymore. And so learning to deal with conflict is just goes back to if you are the type of if you're approaching your marriage in a way where you're laying down your life for the other person, then sometimes in conflict it just means giving up. It just means saying, you know what, all right, I lose this one, even though I don't agree, I lose, fine, and being okay with that, and it not making you bitter towards the other person. And that's the thing, because sometimes people will pretend to do that, but it stays in their heart, and they're rooted in there somewhere is um, they I gave up that one. Actually, I'm giving up this one. They're always making me give up, but I never get my way, and it just grows and grows. You have to have the ability sometimes to lose a conflict and it have no effect on the way that you love your spouse. If you don't have the ability to do that, you're gonna have a lot of conflict, and your marriage will be pretty miserable.
So it sounds like don't sweep it under the rug. Deal with it. Sometimes you have to accept that the other
Sweep
person
it sweep
is
it under the rug if you actually can do that.
okay.
It's the Bible says it's that being able to just give up an offense is glorious. if you can actually do it. If you can just say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to fight even though that bothered me a lot. It's the glory of man to give up an offense, and you just let it go. That's sweeping it under the rug or whatever. It's actually sweeping it out of the house, I guess, is the better way of putting it, rather than under the rug. And if you can do that, that's great. Don't say that you're doing that if you're not actually doing it. Don't say, well, fine, you win this one, if you're actually holding on to it in your heart. No, then you have to deal with the conflict. You can't just let that grow and grow. So it's best if you can sweep it out. If you can't, then actually deal with it. Don't let it fester.
Okay. Finances. I've heard that that's a common reason that couples get divorced is they can't decide on finances. How have you worked through finances? And
well, thankfully, both me and my wife have the same approach to finances, which is as soon as you get money, spend it however you want. Don't save any money. I'm just
okay.
Neither of us are. We're both risk averse, and so we don't go into debt, but we also aren't great at like managing our money. So we're the exact same when it comes to this. So there's no conflict, because one of us will be like, hey, you spent money on that thing, and the other one will be like, well, but you spent money on that thing, and then we'll both shrug and say, yeah, neither of us should have done that, I guess. And so we have not had much conflict about money at all, but it's not because we're like good at it or something like that. So for most couples, that's probably not the case. One is probably more inclined one way. Typically, one member will be inclined towards security in a way that the other one maybe isn't, and that can lead, I'm sure, to all sorts of conflict. And I've seen it lead to conflict. So I mean, the easy answer is you should be on the same page when it comes to the goals of your finances. Like, you should be aiming for the same thing, and it shouldn't be that hard to come to an agreement about those aims. How you get there will then be informed by those goals. But if your goal is, hey, we want to save X amount of dollars, or we want to whatever, then like budgeting from that, you might fight over the details of, no, we need to put more in this category or less in this category or something like that. But as long as you can get on the same page about what your aim is, that's the most important thing. If you can't, that's obviously going to be a big problem. That's my very simplistic, but go listen to your other podcasts for better answers on that stuff.
Okay. And then the final question I have is, this is kind of maybe this isn't a rapid fire question here, now that I think of it. For couples who, it seems a general consensus is have children if you can. For one of the things I was thinking about as I read that was, for couples who, for whatever unfortunate reason, cannot have children, should they consider adopting the amount of kids that they want, like 2-3 kids, or should they just remain without children? Is that more up to the individual couple as to how they want to deal with that? What's a guiding thing to help?
Yeah, I think we certainly know that the Lord views children as a blessing, and that part of the reason why we're here is to have kids, and to raise kids. And so I think as a base operating assumption, it would be most folks should get married and have kids, but not everybody, and that's not everyone's called to get married, and not everyone is going to have kids. I think again, if we're talking trends, less and less people are having kids, and those who are having kids are having less kids. And as a society, that's going to be a problem at some point. I think the birth rate right now is like 1.6 kids per woman, and that is not enough to, that's a declining population. And that's a trend it's been going that direction for a while. And I think there's lots of things that go into it, and I don't want to be overly harsh, but selfishness is the main reason. I
Mm.
think we can say unhesitatingly that folks, for whatever reason, are um, prioritizing things other than kids, and either they just don't see the benefit of kids, or they're being selfish.
Mm.
Um, it seems to me that seeing the benefit of kids is obvious, but it's not obvious to some people. But the having kids is glorious and wonderful, and the Lord calls it a blessing for a reason. And so I think that should be the goal for the vast majority of couples. If you cannot, um, first of all, a lot of folks, how frustrating would it be to be somebody who wanted to have kids and to see a lot of people who just don't care anything about it not having kids, and
Mm.
they could have kids and you really want them but you can't. That's got to be devastating. Um, and so for those folks who really want them and can't, I think adoption is absolutely something that they should pray about and consider and do, because I think there's kids who need to be adopted out there. And so if I hope that many more people get into adoption when they can't have kids, rather than going down the some of the technological ways that we're trying to get around it now. Now, that's not to say like that's also a wonderful solution for some people, but I hope that a lot of people out there just consider adoption, because it's a wonderful thing. It's we're adopted by God, so I think it's beautiful also. Um, but it's not for everybody. No one should feel guilt if they're unable to have kids. And I think it would be interesting if a couple could have kids and they just elected not to. Um, I would want to ask that person why, and get into what their motivations were and reasonings were. And I could see an argument for um, we're going to this dangerous part of the world to be missionaries, and we don't want to bring a kid into that danger or something like that. I can come up with reasons, but I think the uh, default position should be get married and have kids.
Mm. Yeah, going back to what you were saying about the declining birth rate, I think that goes back to what we said at the beginning, which is there's a lot of young people now that are very risk averse,
Mm-hmm.
and having children, well, risk averse, and I also think they don't like difficulty. There's kind of a instant gratification that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of young people have, and they see kids and they go, well, average kid is $10,000 a year, and
Yep.
it's very hard to parent. Like, I don't think I've met any person who has said that parenting is easy. And so I think, and there's a lot of factors like what if what's going to happen to the kid, how are we going to school them, and it's a lot you have to think about and a lot you have to process. And I think there's a lot of young people who just say I don't want to deal with that, and so there's a way I can take the contraceptive pill and just not have to worry about
Right.
this,
Yep.
um, and
Yeah,
kind
it's
of stray away from
easier than ever to not have a kid.
it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, that
I would
reminds
just
me.
say
Oh.
I would just say that while I would never say that parenting is easy, I would say that is overdone. That the difficulty of it versus the blessing of it is way overstated.
Mm.
That um, raising children, and I'm saying this, I did not birth any of them, so that's setting that part aside. Um, Once you actually have them, the raising of them, the difficulty versus the joy is like it's not close, and I think that sometimes gets under discussed. The joy of it is way up here, and the difficulty of it is way down here. Don't let people
Mm.
confuse you by their belly aching on social media about how difficult it is. Everyone belly aches about everything. That's fine. The the joy of it is just so much higher that um, yeah, don't let people uh, talking about the difficulty of it scare you away. It's negligible when it comes to that versus the joy of it.
Yeah, I've heard the hardest things are usually the things worth doing. Like getting married is hard, something you should do. Having children is hard, something you should do,
Yeah.
because like, and not because it's the difficulty is so like immensely hard. Um, but in that the joy you get from that's what you just said is a very very common thing that I hear is people are saying the joy of having children is so much greater than the difficulty that they have birthing them and raising them, that it's just worth doing it even if it is a hard thing.
Yeah.
And great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and having
Thank you for
conversation.
having me. I
Yeah, I've
appreciate it.
really enjoyed this, and definitely the self-sacrifice thing I think is my biggest takeaway here. For I guess final question, if you could tell everyone who's listening right now one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh man. When it comes to relationships or just life advice in general, because
It could be anything you want.
uh, if it's anything I want, it would be uh, join a church, dive in, go consistently, join a home group or care group or whatever it takes to build your life with other humans. Get off your dang phones.
All right. Thanks for coming on.
All right, man.